Hi, and welcome to St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Napa, California. I want to share a few thoughts with you this week on transformation. Jesus invites us to be transformed through a real relationship with God. Now, Jesus doesn't promise us that following him will be easy or that it will lead us to a life of ease or general happiness. In fact, Jesus says that following him means that we'll have to take up our cross. But through following Jesus in good times and bad times, through the experience of suffering and of endurance with God through difficult times, we are transformed. And that transformation produces in us something new. A new joy, a new peace, a new hope, a new way of abiding with God, so that each time we face something, we have the memory of how God has been with us and transformed us in other times when we've walked through the valley of the shadow of death. I want to share a story with you about one thing in my life that has been utterly transformed by God. When I was a child, I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of the moon. I was afraid of any number of things happening, so much so that I would patrol the house for safety hazards. And my family called me Miss Safety. In kindergarten, a firefighter told us that Christmas trees were flammable, and so all through the Christmas season, I would wake in the middle of the night to check on the Christmas tree and make sure it wasn't on fire. And living in fear lasted in my life for some time. I became an adolescent, and as a teenager, I added on more fears. I became afraid of what other people would think of me and how they might respond to me. So much so that when I saw other people being bullied or spoken ill of, I wanted to say something. I wanted to say that I disagreed. I wanted to speak truth, to stand up for them and even for myself. But I didn't. I let my fears get the better of me. And every time I let those fears have power, it was like a pain in my heart. And all of those pains added up. And they became, over time, a hatred of myself. That hatred was toxic, and it colored so much of my life and my relationship with God. I didn't want to live that way anymore, and I began to pray that God would give me courage. A good friend of mine told me once that God doesn't zap us with courage when we ask for things like courage, but rather gives us opportunities to show courage. And that's what God did in my life. As a young adult, I felt called to be a missionary of the Episcopal Church doing agricultural work in Liberia. I went to Liberia for a year, and part of the way that I knew that it was a call from God was I had this huge fear in my heart, which was ever present. But alongside that fear came this exhilarated excitement and joy at the idea of this work that God was calling me to, that perhaps I might be able to serve God and to serve others. And it was such a strong emotion. I'd never experienced anything like it before, and I thought, surely this means it's a call from God. I met other people that had served in different capacities around the world as volunteers, and I noticed that they had this beautiful faith and peace about them. And I thought, well, God is just going to zap me with transformation because I said yes. God's going to give me everything that I need. But transformation doesn't work like that. It's long and it's hard and it requires a lot of effort on our part. So I was on the plane on my way to Liberia. My return ticket wasn't until a year later. And I remember that I let the fears get the better of me, and I sat on that plane unable to move. I was so consumed by fear. Day by day, as I lived in Liberia, I met people that had lived through the most extraordinarily difficult of times, a brutal civil war. Almost all of them had lost people that they loved in that war. And yet, when I asked them, "How are you today?" the common response, instead of just good, which is what you might hear in this country, instead of saying good, they said, "I thank God." Every single day, the response again and again was, "How are you?" "I thank God." And that faith, that witness of people that had been through the most horrible experiences that humankind can suffer, still believed, not only believed in God, but knew that God was holding them. in God's own loving hands. God's love for us, God holding us, doesn't mean that bad things won't happen to us. But it does mean that we are never alone, that not a hair falls from our head apart from the knowledge and love of God, that God knows us utterly, desires a personal relationship with us, and is eager to help us day by day transform. I wonder what transformation you have been experiencing in your own life in these difficult times. I wonder what ways God is breaking in and teaching you. Perhaps your prayer life has changed. Perhaps you've been able to get in touch with friends that you haven't talked to in a long time. Perhaps in the midst of abject fear or suffering, you have found the presence of God speaking in your heart. Perhaps you've learned to tell truth or to seek it. Perhaps you're committing yourself to learning and growing, to look into your own heart, to see what's there and to see how it is that we all participate in systems of injustice or racism. I know I have seen transformation in so many people in these times, and I trust that this is just the beginning of God's transforming each one of our hearts. My prayer for you this week is that you will see that transformation, see the loving hands of God holding you, feel the peace of God around you, so that you and me and all of us, one by one, get to participate in remaking our own hearts, our communities, and our world into an image of something much closer to God's love, God's mercy, God's justice for all people. Amen.